Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel. My name is Rajat Pejal. I am the Global Head of Enterprise Risk for Cantor Fitzgerald. That's really all things operational risk and non-financial in nature. I've been in the industry for almost 15 plus years, working across London and New York. And I have the pleasure of this wonderful panel we have today to discuss amongst other things, the volatility we've seen in the markets in recent times, how that impacts back office as well as operational risk. So without further ado, I'll just introduce the panel. So we have Christoph Adam, Head of Listed Derivatives, EMEA and APAC, Prime Services and Clearing at SocGen. Tony Ashraf, at BlackRock, he is the Global Head of Derivative Operations, Collateral Management and Clearing. Dario Crispini is the CEO of Kaizen Reporting. And finally, Tim Smith, who is the Head of Business Risk at OSTC. So what a year it's been, and it's not even over yet, right? So we've had a global pandemic, which is continuing, although hopefully, the UK started the vaccine implementation yesterday, so fingers crossed that goes well. We had US elections leading to all kinds of volatility, all parts of the world, I guess, and Brexit, which sometimes we almost forget that still needs to be done, amongst other things. So why don't we start with you, Tim, in terms of the exchange malfunctions we've had this year. So we had the issues in Tokyo, also Mexico. How does that impact you and what your organization does and your role, and also your thoughts on the way forward and how we need to prepare ourselves?
Hi, Rajat. Thank you, and happy to be here, and thanks for having me on the panel. I mean, I think coming from a risk background, it's important to consider the environment we're talking about here. There are multiple systems, multiple technologies, components within that technology, multiple parties involved, often outsourced. We're talking complex systems, hugely complex systems when we're looking at trade matching, clearing, settlement. And I don't think there's any getting away from the complexity that has been built up over the years since markets went electronic. I don't think there's any getting away from that, and it's only exacerbated from mergers and acquisitions that have occurred over the past years. And I think particularly when we're looking at market infrastructure, we are looking at what I would class, to use a bit of a risk term, as a tightly coupled environment. And what do I mean by that? So if you picture a chain with many links, you can have an issue down here at this end of the link. It very, very quickly escalates down the chain, causing potentially big issues. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen a great deal, but when you do get a big incident, it can be wide impacting and wide ranging. And as you mentioned, we've had a few market-wide outages this year at a couple of exchanges. So I think when you have that combination of a complex environment, which we undoubtedly have here, and a tightly coupled system, outages like this are almost inevitable, unfortunately. I don't think there's any real getting away from that. So, I mean, how it affects us as a business, yes, like anyone else, I think we would much prefer a market-wide outage than just an outage that affected us as a participant. I think in terms of level playing field, that's better for us as a business. I mean, we're fortunate that we diversify so that we're not reliant on any particular venue, but it causes pain for everyone. There's no getting away from that. So to come back to the question about what can we do as we overhaul these legacy systems and what can we try to do going forward, I think it is to try and remove some of those layers of complexity, if we can, that build up over time. And I think that's not just aimed at exchanges. I think that's across the piece. I think every business has legacy systems, architecture that have evolved over time and can get quite complicated and hard to manage. And I think the other point I would stress here is that this is not, personal view, I don't think this is just an IT thing. It's often quite easy just to blame a network component failure or a software bug, and that often is what happens in the public notices. But in my personal experience, there's always a human element involved in this. And so when I'm talking about trying to remove some of the complexity, I think it's not just IT, it's some of the organizational structures around how we manage these processes and systems. And that's certainly something that we're trying to look at OSTC.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Christoph, would you do you have a view on that? How did that impact SocGen, and what are your observations?
Yeah, no, I mean, I concur with what Tim was saying about the layers of complexity and the tight coupled participants or systems. I think it's when you go on regulated markets, and actually the top of the chain is the exchange or the CCP, then and when issues occur at that level, just cascades down to the whole chain. And so the resiliency that exists, and the sort of the test and drills and I would say also communication is very important to make sure that the market participants and the end clients eventually are able to recover from those events. So on my side, I think I mean, there's been more than just the two you mentioned, but definitely they are having I mean, severe impact to our clients. We you know, as a broker or a bank, we tend to be a pass-through to whatever happens at the CCP. So on my side, I would really want the exchanges and CCPs to work better at communicating when they have these issues, because I don't think that's something which they are very well prepared for. The recovery procedures, the communication to us as direct member, most on these markets we tend to be direct members when that happens, but the communication and the amount of information which is available to us to start to make decisions. You know, when sometimes we see trades which are duped, and some exchanges decide to cancel the trades, other exchanges decide not to cancel the trades and let the market sort out whatever they want to do with those trades. Sometimes they're happy to repay you when there's losses. Sometimes clients actually accept to trade out of the position themselves. So it's complex. It's complex to handle, and I think definitely exchanges should be better prepared to try to, in a way, they communicate to us as members so that we can cascade that to our clients. And also, I think we should improve also the way all the sort of rehearsal or drills as to when similar technical failures happen. Okay, how do we operate in this tightly coupled chain? How do we interact together? How do we set up some sort of I don't know if it's the right term, a crisis team to communicate and cascade information, and how well the recovery is working. So I think this is really important to better work together, because we're here to make sure to serve our clients, to make sure that they have certainty on their trades, to know exactly what their positions are. And in those times, in those instances, sometimes it took days, not hours, to figure out exactly which trades were correct or not. So I think there's still more work required. I still think that the pace of change in the disruption in terms of digital transformation is only going to increase. So it's likely that we're going to see more of these events. It's a fairly competitive landscape at the exchange and CCP level. So these guys have to be real time. And so they are updating their systems. And I think we can say we see definitely more instances of these happening than in the past, where probably there was less upgrades and changes. So we need to watch out. We need to reach out. We need to make sure we're ready, and internally, but as well coordinating through the various governance that exists between CCPs, exchanges, and members, and review what went wrong and learn the lessons.
Thanks, Christoph. So maybe related to that, and Christoph, you touched on this in terms of we as the world keeps getting smaller, and given the focus on technology, and probably it's going to be even more with the pandemic, we're likely to see more of these events. Who do you think has a role to play in terms of, I suppose, regulating these exchanges and making sure they have the right controls? I'm sure some of that already happens, but in light of these events, do you expect the local regulators to play a bigger role, or is there another industry body that needs to come into play?
Well, I mean, I think there's obviously these exchanges and CCPs are regulated already. I think usually they have a fairly strong governance model themselves, where they would go through the events and review and take actions. I mean, there are committees usually that exist at the exchange, either product or operational risk committees, which would review those events and make sure they take action. So I think I'm not sure there's a need to change the current process. So I think what probably we want to stress is is if these events would continue to occur more often at more places, more exchanges, I'm sure the regulator would basically do a deep dive and start inquiring more on the with more details on the technology roadmap from certain exchanges or CCPs. But I think the framework is okay. I think it's key for those exchanges to interact with their members due to the tight integration that we are all working together. And I think progress can be made there. We talk about, all the time about DMP or default management, where there's a tight coordination between members and CCPs because due to the losses that can happen. But on these operational incidents, I don't think that there's enough coordination yet. That's where we can probably improve.
Tim, anything more from your perspective?
I mean, on that particular point, I've spent some time in exchanges. I know for a fact that yeah, this is a key regulatory area of concern generally. I mean, as exchanges and have become more global, they are systemically important, is well recognized. And trust me, they spend a lot of time and effort on resilience and making sure that things are as best as they can be. But as I said earlier, every now and again, with the best will in the world, you can have as many controls and monitoring as you want. Sometimes the holes align and something will get through and unfortunately has a catastrophic impact. So, I mean, I would agree with Christophe. I don't think it's necessarily a change in the current arrangements. I'm sure the exchanges that have had issues are getting the appropriate scrutiny from their regulators. I'm pretty sure that's happening. I mean, I think perhaps as an industry, we can share understanding and knowledge a little bit more maybe, and also learn from other industries. I think the way that markets have developed, we're becoming a little bit more like other industries outside of financial services that have highly complex systems that are also tightly coupled and have very similar characteristics. And there's maybe lessons that we can learn from other industries. That's something I've become a bit more aware of over the last few years. And yeah, I mean, there's certainly, if you don't want to read about it yourself, then get your risk guys to read up on some of the sort of industrial disasters that have occurred over the past few years, because there's some interesting lessons that have been learned from there that we can perhaps port into our own worlds.
Absolutely. Yeah. We want to learn from other people's mistakes and hopefully it doesn't happen. Thank you. And somewhat related to that, Tim, and I was going to mention the R word, resilience, which is definitely extremely important for 2020 with everything going on. So related to that, I wanted to check with the panel about data management challenges and what firms are doing in terms of their in terms of becoming more resilient. And some of the firms have been found to have a weak infrastructure during the pandemic. So Dario, I don't know if there's anything you're observing from your experience that you want to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two are coupled. The regulatory focus is certainly increasing on operational resilience, and that's not just the exchanges, but it's the firms as well. And from a data point of view, we're very much involved in the reviewing of data quality of end of process data, so the reporting side of things, and the regulators will look through that data quality to see what that means for the organization as a whole and use that as a proxy of their overall ability to manage risk internally and their data and their resilience. So the two are linked. We're seeing really, I think data quality has been an ongoing problem, partly because of the explosion in volumes, but the explosion in complexity as well, as systems have fragmented, as trading mechanisms and instruments have expanded or increased. That has increased complexity. So we're seeing a lot of complexity in these firms, and that has resulted in really a falling away of the data quality that we're seeing. So that, I think we can point to a number of well-known causes of this, but generally it's the source data and its quality, so the golden sources of data, the fragmentation of standards, but also the lack of standards in some areas means that it's harder to couple everything together, and that gives problems. And we're also seeing like constant changes in the sort of regulatory framework, which the systems then have to accommodate. And you put all that together and you end up with a lot of data quality issues. Now, I think it'd be useful for firms if they were to look at themselves and say, how quickly can they resolve any of these data issues? Is there a mechanism in the firm to be able to highlight where there's a data issue, and that then feeds through, and what's the timeline for getting that resolved? Because what we've seen historically has been, you know, many months to actually address some of these data issues. That would be aside from the sort of settlement issues which tend to get addressed, but the data issues tend to persist and then reoccur. Now, with these data problems, there are ongoing attrition. There's ongoing attrition in the organisations, and it has a lot of hidden costs. So I think you know, if effort was put into the sorting out the data flows a little bit more, I know it's a lot of money has already been spent on that, but you'll see it at the bottom line as well. It will come through because you'll get smoother processes, less attrition in the trading process.
Tony, anything from your perspective?
Thanks, Raja and Daryl. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what's been said I would concur with. I mean, from my perspective, and I guess my feedback here probably touches on the first question too. And I think the overarching theme that I believe we need to think about on an ongoing basis is kind of like what Daryl was saying, was around about data standardization and the ongoing efforts from a digitization perspective too. For me, they're the two key underpinnings of how we build the model on an ongoing basis. And thinking about the derivative flow more broadly, when, at least from my perspective, when I'm thinking about that journey towards digitization, there's really three key elements that I'm thinking about and considering. The first is digitizing and standardizing the dusty old legal agreements that govern and allow us to trade, as well as our CSAs themselves. We're seeing a move away from those old, archaic, perhaps documents, to fully digital native documents, which ultimately improves the negotiation process, removes friction from the process because we have consistency between us and the other side of the party. And I actually think what's key to that, touching on the data standardization element, is the work they're doing around about CDM, and that propagates across the overall flow as well. So firstly, start by digitizing the legal framework. Secondly, digitizing the actual management of trades themselves. So whilst the cleared flow does offer some efficiency, the inherent nature of trading OTC does give rise to friction. And we are continuing to look at a number of traditional, or I guess, to transform the traditional OTC model by using technology like DLT, which I know for some may seem far out there, but I think it is now at the stage where it is becoming more of a reality. And if we get to that stage, you get to a model where you open the door for true self-governed smart contracts that source their data from an authoritative golden source. So exit that trade piece. And then lastly, the other big area of friction that I think we need to think about, and again it comes back to the standardization data, is the physical movement of assets, right? So in the event where we're having to move cash or we're having to move securities, that's still a really inefficient process. And if you consider from a buy side perspective, we're going to see more and more of the buy side using less cash, so expanding their collateral schedules. And the fact that cash just doesn't make sense for many, both the buy and the sell side now. I think there's an opportunity, again, touching on data and transformation, is the concept of tokenization. And this tokenization could take many different forms. One of the areas that I think is particularly interesting is potentially the use of money market funds and using tokenized money market funds, just because they're cash-like. And if they could have some broad adoption, you create almost a collateral coin to an extent, for want of a better term. And really by doing so, remove a lot of the friction from the process, move to real-time instantaneous settlement, remove the need to reconcile, etc., etc. So really, for me, the two key overarching themes around about this question, and when it comes to data and removing manual processes, is standardization of the data, as well as that ongoing journey from a digitization perspective.
And Tony and Daria, both of you, I guess this journey towards digitization, as you guys touched on, was happening anyways pre-pandemic. Are you guys seeing any of these fast-tracked in light of the situation we're in? I guess any specific areas you think are getting more of attention, more of a higher priority than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, an interesting area that I think it took the pandemic and perhaps the volatility to perhaps waking up a little bit more was in the ETD, so the futures and listed option space. I mean, I think much of that industry has relied on somewhat legacy technology and processes. It works, but we saw when volatility and volume increases, there was significant strain across the industry, and it wasn't just felt with the brokers or even the buy side, as Christoph and Tim were mentioning, it was at the exchange and CCP level as well. So I think ETD is recognized and understood that as a product class has to evolve. So we're certainly seeing a lot of progression from that perspective, and I think it's been the volatility that's kick-started that more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, and we're involved in the digitization of regulations, and we see that as a starting point. I think there's quite a long way to go in terms of how, once those regulations are digitized, they can be utilized. And we're also looking at the CDM, the Common Data Model for reporting, and that is getting some traction. Not necessarily it's getting some traction in the UK, but there seems to be a lot more push from the regulators for that project to move forward overseas, particularly in the APAC region. So we're kind of hopeful that will be a real boon to the industry, but that's still, I think, going to be a couple of years away before you get something that's actually usable. However, the starting point of digitization of regulation, that's already there and available, and it's really about the speed at which that gets adopted in the existing systems and processes within organizations.
Okay, thank you both. Moving on to our next topic, as I mentioned earlier, so Brexit, right? We with everything going on in this year, I feel like sometimes it hasn't deserved the attention that perhaps it deserves, and it still needs to be done, and it has huge impacts on I suppose globally, but certainly in Europe for financial services. So I know we've had some time to prepare for it with the information that we've had, but I'll be keen to understand from you what your observations are and the specific risks going into this final period. Now, before we do that, Oliver, could we have the audience poll as well, just to see how the audience feels about Brexit? Maybe we'll give this a minute or two. I guess while we're waiting, Christoph, do you want to kick off? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Brexit. Yeah, I mean, I guess it ran back to us very quickly at the end of the year after that crazy year that we had. So I think people are reasonably well prepared. There was definitely some adjustments in the concept of some of the regulation that the countries were meant to do in case of hard Brexit didn't really happen, as it was discussed for the last deadline. So I must say that definitely that created a bit more work, a bit more transfer of clients from the UK to Europe, which is all done on our side. But definitely that is creating more work. We've seen as well for some of the smaller players more work and actually last minute work. We have some clients contacting us saying they're having issues with some target 2 accounts in Europe, which for some of the markets they want to access, they seem to be finally realizing they don't have a target 2 account accessible for their settlement, either for their cash settlement or they are actually the DVP process, which create issues. So depending on the size of the participant, I think there's still actually some last minute ramble to find solutions and to adapt to the requirement of Brexit. So we don't underestimate the impact even for financial services, where we see great progress has been made in terms of equivalence. There's still some serious gaps that are going to take time to truly tell us how difficult they are. But I think the marketplace is probably reasonably well prepared. And it's mostly for the smaller players to make sure they don't have a last minute issue on that particular matter.
Okay. Tim, anything in particular from you?
No, I mean, I think, yeah, as Christophe said, we've known for a while that it's going to be a hard Brexit, whatever the trade deal or otherwise. And I think in our case, we sort of took an operational view and then a sort of a more business strategic risk view of it. I think at an operational level, I'd probably say that, we think we're where we need to be because of the planning. I mean, we're a pretty risk averse firm anyway. And we're always planning for kind of worst case scenarios. And I think, we have offices in the EU, so we had to consider that. We obviously are UK based business head office. But we have, for example, memberships of European exchanges. So we had to go through the process and understand what the implications of, trading as a third country from the 1st of January mean for us, and whether that's additional reporting obligations or whatever it might be. So I think we spent a lot of time and effort going through that. We used external advice. We're not a firm that has a huge amount of legal and regulatory expertise and resources in-house. And I think it was key for us to make sure that we had the right external knowledge and expertise to support our decision-making. So I think that was at an operational level. And I think for more interesting for me with my kind of business risk hat on is what the next few years are going to look like. From a geopolitical point of view, we've got trade situations around the world. And I think that's where it perhaps presents opportunities as well for firms like ours. So I think, in summary, operationally, I think we're where we need to be. I think the interesting thing is what happens over the next few years in Europe and around the world, and what opportunities can that present for us.
Well, while we were talking, I guess the audience poll results have come through, and so 58% feel they're pretty confident about where this is going. 8% say bring it on. So out of that number, well, given that we're less than a month away, that's 8%. It should be fine, 17%. So and so the rest have no clue or expecting a delay. So I suppose largely optimistic in terms of the time people have spent, and I hope it all goes as planned. Dario, anything from your perspective? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really in a position to comment on anything other than the kind of reporting side of things, which I know does cause firms a lot of pain. Our conversations with our clients, I think they are well prepared. They've done a good job, but with all these significant regulatory changes, it's really only after the event that you really know how well prepared you were. In the reporting side of things, it's such a detailed area that there are always headaches. We have seen that the FCA has come out with a note just over a week ago around the EMIR reporting that will affect all the ETD derivatives that have to be reported, and they've said that UK branches of firms established in the third country are out of scope of their reporting. So that's a complete change to what the status quo is today, and that was totally unexpected. So that's going to leave some firms scrambling to make some changes to their systems. We're seeing problems around the share trading obligation, which is on the equity side, and that's going to cause a few headaches, and the dual reporting obligations that some firms will end up with. Having to report the same instruments to both the EU and EU NCAs or trade repositories and to the UK. But otherwise, I think a lot of work has been done, and we'll see the real quality of what that means, the quality of the reporting, only after go live. And I think the work hasn't finished yet. Once we go live, I think there needs to be a really big push to check that everything is working as as we hope it is, and do that QA process.
Okay, thank you. I suppose shifting gears maybe a little bit. So moving on to liquidity, and what does that mean in these times of volatility? And well, there's uncleared margin rules, margin optimization, and given the year we've had, and as we've already touched on, the fact that this is not over and there could be more in the future. What does that mean from a financial services perspective? Tony, if you want to comment on that.
Sure, thank you, Rajat. So yeah, I mean, listen, the way I position this is, I think collateral management and ultimately optimization has never mattered more than it does today. And the way that I position this is, if you think about how it's evolved over the past couple of years, it's kind of got us to where we are. Is in the past, collateral management and optimization perhaps didn't even really exist, but certainly collateral management was considered almost a back office activity and something that we did post trades, and for those that did it, it was really a simple risk mitigation tool. If you think about where we are now, it's increasingly moving up the value chain, so from back to middle to even to an extent to front office, and rather than being something that we do just post trades, it's a key consideration before you actually put a trade on, in terms of who to put it on with, whether you go bilateral, whether you go cleared, etc., even which CCP to use, and so on. So optimization is happening at multiple points across the chain now. And if you think about it, it's not just about risk management, it's about generating revenue, funding, and ultimately we need to consider just optimization more broadly across the flow. And I think what ultimately has happened is, because of this shift, we've seen an increase in complexity across the process. And where we're starting to see people consider more and more is, we're moving away from what was traditionally a very product silo model, where you would perhaps think about optimization within your cleared flow, your bilateral flow, even your sec lending flow. They'd all be independent, to much more a concept of a shared optimization across all products and across all life cycle. And so that, I think, is fundamental. And linked to that, what I think is key on an ongoing basis is just increased intelligence within that flow as well. So we're seeing that built directly into the collateral management processes, as I say, with a focus on pre-trade analytics, real-time exposure calculations, and ongoing optimization. So rather than it being just something that you do once a day, or even at point of when you're called for collateral, something that you continue to look at as your inventory and your book changes as well. So that ultimately all links back to the other point we're talking about, where the need to remove manual processes, because the process is just so much more complex, it's so much more detailed and involved. So we need to make sure there's efficiency cutting through it. And the thing I would say, and again, just given the buy side perspective here, I think this is perhaps an area that the sell side have probably already been doing and doing in a large part, particularly because of the way they manage their book. But it's an area that I think the buy side are having to take more notice of and certainly look at more broadly. And there was this kind of point and question round about that kind of dash for cash that we saw during the height of the volatility. And again, for perspective, what we saw from a buy side perspective was we saw a large movement out of, for instance, liquidity funds to raise cash, and then use that cash to post to our brokers because the CCPs were calling for more cash. And just kind of tying that back, where I think, again, there's an opportunity is broadening the types of assets that you can use for collateral and margin purposes. And coming back to that kind of money market fund point, if a money market fund was widely accepted and it was more mobile, a lot of funds already have their cash invested in those type of assets. Why not just use that asset rather than going through this whole process of raising cash to post cash? So I think it's all linked together when we think about it. And uncleared margin rules is just going to make this more and more a reality, particularly as phase 5 and 6 start to hit over the next couple of years. And certainly from a buy side perspective, we're spending a lot more time thinking about this, and it will be a key topic across the industry, I think, for the next couple of years as well.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. Christoph, do you want to add to that?
Yes, Rajat. Yeah, no, I think I can definitely see where Tony is coming from, and we can see that in this Dash for Cash, we definitely helped our clients during the March, April period to upgrade, downgrade, or basically optimize their collateral, because there was such a rush for cash from the CCPs that we were facing, that basically we had to help them to take any sort of collateral they had available. And for us, because as Tony mentioned, it's true that we've been optimizing our book, our collateral for some time. We're able to then pass on that knowledge and help our clients provide us with maybe not exactly the collateral which is accepted at the CCP, but for us to be able to transform that, upgrade, and then satisfy the CCP requirement for those intraday calls that have been quite important and numerous during that period of time. So we've even pushed that model to design a sort of a tool which we're now sharing with our clients to for them to be able to optimize their collateral on certain asset classes. So maybe not on all asset classes, but definitely have some way in the ETD space, for example, to for our clients to see how they can optimize their collateral, because it's definitely time now to move away from straight cash, knowing that cash is attracting negative rates. So it's definitely not the way forward. So definitely the intensity for us as direct member of CCPs, the intensity of the intraday calls, the intensity of the variations in the markets have created huge margin calls, which we've been able to satisfy. But we had to work very closely with our clients, and I helped them to deal with those movements. And I think that's where we act, as member in the chain, again, in that very tight chain that exists. We act as this sort of intermediating level where we can actually bring in our experience and our expertise to accept a wide range of collateral to then satisfy the requirements we are facing from those CCPs. So UMR and phase 5 and 6 will definitely continue to create more stress. So I think the marketplace, us as participants, as sales side, we're here to definitely continue to improve our services, offer more avenues and possibilities for our clients to give us a wider range of collateral. I agree with Tony that the concept of money market funds, if they were more liquid, I think is definitely a good idea. I mean, that exists to some extent a little bit in the US, but it's not exactly as fluid or is reserved to only a few participants. So it's definitely something that we should try to review and expand in marketplace like in Europe or Asia. Just try to allow for invested cash to be more mobile and help our clients have a wider range of collateral. So definitely something we're going to push along and push through the risk committees. We see push the risk framework of CCPs for them to be more flexible and to accept a more diverse range of collateral. And it's listening to our feedback, the feedback from our buy-side clients to make sure we press along and we continue to evolve the infrastructure overall.
Thanks, Christophe. I'm just looking at some of the questions come through from the audience. There's quite a few, so that's good. Let me just pick on one in particular, which is which, funnily enough, we talked about it earlier in terms of COVID impacting the organizations, right? So in your experience, what's worked well, what could have gone better, and also, do you think this is the new reality?
I can have a go at that, Rajat. We within Kaizen, we were lucky. We were set up for a remote working policy, and that executed perfectly. I think the team has performed, and I think this is true across the sector. The team performed marvelously well over that period, and I'm ever so pleased and proud of what they've been able to do. And it's under difficult circumstances. And I think in terms of the industry as a whole and our clients, we've not seen any, if you like, denigration in what they've been able to do in a remote setting versus when they were in the office. What's probably not working as well is where you have to be more creative, and those pieces of work that require more collaboration from across the team or teams. But overall, I think it's been excellent. I do think that the world has changed permanently. We certainly have. We've got a lot of pressure from our teams that they want to see this as a continuing process. But that said, virtually everybody wants to come back to the office. We're still working remotely, and by the way, everybody wants to come back to the office, but with more flexible arrangements from maybe 2 or 3 days a week in the office. I think everybody's sick of being at home and does want that change and that interaction with their colleagues. And so hopefully we'll be able to get back to that situation sooner rather than later.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just add, Roger. I mean, I think, to be perfectly honest, I'm still kind of amazed that the whole industry have managed to pull this off. If you think about it, I mean, in the space of a very short period of time, the whole industry's went to a remote environment, and I think by and large has performed amazingly well. So yeah, I mean, I think that certainly has worked. Similar to what Daddy was saying, I think that people are expecting and demanding more flexibility, and I think that's the right thing. So I think it has fundamentally changed the way that people look at working, and will continue to look at working on an ongoing basis. And I think it should, right? I think if we come out of this and perhaps just try and go back to the way that it's always been, I think we're missing a trick there, because it's demonstrated that there is value and there is opportunity, and we can make this work. So why not learn from it? And the other element that I think is important and interesting is, we've seen this manifest itself when we've been hiring, because it's like many, we're a large global organization with offices all over the world, and a lot of the time we hire because we have an office there, right? And that's where we hire and that's where we go to. But the interesting piece for me is this starts to open up multiple opportunities for talent pools that perhaps you wouldn't normally go into, which I think is really interesting, where you actually, it's not about where do I have an office, it's about where do I find the best person and where's the best talent. And that for me is a really important and really interesting shift in terms of mentality when it comes to talent management and hiring on an ongoing basis. So that's certainly one of the areas that we're focused on and we're thinking about, and hopefully the industry kind of catches up and thinks about that in the same way.
You're right, Tony. In fact, you might have seen I mean, I'm guessing it happened in the UK as well, but certainly I'm based in New York, and when you might have read of the mass exodus, you know, a large number of people have left Manhattan for a number of reasons, right? One being the scare itself, but also the fact that you can work remotely. They've moved upstate or you know, other places, and there's a question about, you know, if this is the new reality, or some of it could be. Some of us, as you say, can work remotely and have been productive. Maybe they, you know, what does that mean for the real estate in New York City, and perhaps the same in London and other big cities across the world. Tim, Christoph, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with what Dario and Tony have said. I think you know, very similar experiences at OSTC. I think you know, the spirit of the company really shone through, and the ability and the flexibility shown was fantastic to see throughout the year. I mean, operationally, it's worked very well, touch wood. You know, we obviously prioritized certain areas to make sure they were up on board and working remotely as well as they needed to be. Obviously, we have traders, you know, they were the priority. There was some nervousness about, for example, you know, the ability of domestic broadband to cope with the speeds needed. That all worked well, and I think that's a testament to the infrastructure that's there, to be honest. And I mean, I think, you know, yeah, it's been a crazy year. Volatility we talked about. You know, we like volatility as a firm. We don't like wild swings, but we like volatility. We've been able to make the markets. We've been able to provide the liquidity that we need to on the markets that we operate in. And I think it's been a good year. It's been recognised by FOW actually this morning in their awards. So I think, you know, it's gone very well. I think some of the challenges similar to what Dario touched on. I think, you know, people like working from home, but I think they do miss the office environment. And I think digital working is great, but there are times where there's no replacement for just getting people together in an office. Zoom and Teams is great technology, and extremely grateful that we've been able to have that. but there's no replacement for getting people together. And I think, the hybrid approach going forward is probably something that, that a lot of companies are looking at going forward. And interesting times. And I don't think it's going to go back to the way it was. I can't see that. As Tony said, it would be a missed opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things just on related to that that's come through as a question from audience is, what does this mean for outsourcing, right? So there was already a lot of regulatory scrutiny in the build up to, in the lead up to the crisis, and but what does this mean for outsourcing and third party dependencies? Does it undermine the case because I guess you're diversifying your risk, or does it does it strengthen the case because you're diversifying, or does it undermine it?
I think we just need to explore how well it's gone, because it could have gone very differently. And the whole supply chain, I think, has worked very, very well. We've not experienced any issues at all. No diminution in service. We've actually seen a big expansion, partly because of the volatility. But I think there does need to be a careful oversight of where there are outsourcing arrangements. But I can only see that increasing now, partly because of what Tony said in terms of the geographical distribution and the availability now of an understanding that it is safe in certain circumstances to use remote solutions, whether that's provided by individuals or by third-party suppliers. But yeah, I do think there needs to be a bit of a post-mortem of the whole, how this has all worked. What were the downsides? The trading floor being closed is a really big issue for regulators. They've kind of tried to keep the data flowing in terms of the monitoring data for all the trading activity, but because people and the traders are working remotely, the oversight is diminished. So that's an area that will be explored. But everything else, all the back office and subsequent processing, that seems to have all stood up to the test, which is great. I do think people have worked a lot longer hours during this period just to keep everything moving forward. And as this drags on, I'm not sure how long that can really be sustained. So I don't know whether we'll see a falling away of performance as this pandemic progresses. But like you said in the beginning, I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel now with the first vaccines, and hopefully things will start to ease up in the next few months after Easter.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's an interesting one because on the one hand, I guess you can. Well, what's different about this crisis, and we do a lot of scenario analysis within risk management, try to think about, trying to have a crystal ball, I guess, in some ways. But what was different about this crisis was it's global. It's impacted everyone, right? So historically, when you think of a big terrorist attack or a significant impact, it's probably concentrated in one part of the world, and you say, okay, business continuity, for example, you say, okay, there's a plan B, C, D, but this one impacts everyone. And if you have a third party in India or China or somewhere, they could be even worse impacted in some ways, and you may not have much control over how to manage that. So it does make you think about what your checklist in terms of picking the right outsourcer or third party should look like. What else do you need to add there? Right, how are we doing on time, Oliver? I think we might take one more question. This is interesting. So it's about cybersecurity. And so spending by business, would you see, again, in light of this year, would you see spend go up? Would you see any changes in terms of how the cybersecurity strategy works for firms? Any thoughts on that?
mean, Christopher, I'm not sure we will see a drop in the, I think it's back to data and data leakage. I think there's huge investment, at least in banks, to make sure that data leakage and all to do with cybersecurity is properly handled. So on my side, I'm not sure I would expect a slowdown. There's definitely a rebalancing of priorities, and I think the fact that data is an asset and the way we handle data and our clients' information is definitely something which is getting increasing focus. But I think cybersecurity was already a strong focus before the crisis, before COVID happened. I think it will continue to be so, and I think all the GDPR and the data management, as we call it, is definitely still taking a prominent priorities and allocation of funds. So yes, it may be that cybersecurity per se itself is not just a single item top of the list, following the sort of low volatility that we've had. But I still think it's going to be as part of data management in a wider concept. This is something which is taken very seriously by the financial sector, and we still see from time to time sort of events where data is compromised. So I think more data ownership, more data maintenance, better referential, all of that will all lead to eventually better security for our client data overall.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think this goes back to the points that were made about the increasing complexity of the trading environment and settlement environment. As you get this increased complexity, more systems, the cybersecurity costs are just going to increase. You have to build cybersecurity controls in at the code level, as well as supporting the transmission of data. So we've seen ourselves just as we've built new products and so on, we have to spend more on cybersecurity, and I think it's going to be correlated to the level of complexity that we're seeing across systems and across the markets. So I think the long-term prognosis is that's going to be a driver for increasing costs, and the threats are constantly evolving. So that's adding to the costs as well. So you have to keep up with all of those threats. So you've got a number of factors, and unless there's something fundamental that's going to make the whole cybersecurity process a lot less expensive, I can't see costs coming down whatsoever.
Absolutely. So more of the same. Certainly, cybersecurity is not going anywhere, and if anything, we'll probably see higher spend going forward. I know that from my own experience and observation, different organizations in the last few years, the role of the CISO has become so important. And it started off as someone who worked for the CTO, and now increasingly overlapping with risk and touching different parts of the business, and rightly so. Right, I'm just conscious of time. Thank you very much to all the panelists. I hope the audience found this helpful and useful.